Welcome in, everybody. 5 minutes with Sean, maybe 10. Sit down edition. Y'all know how I love these. We are kicking off April with yet again another Mental Health Monday kickoff. This one's a bit special for me, though, and I'm humbled by the whole thing in a way because I'm glad to know that our show sets up in such a way where folks feel comfortable reaching out. So all of you know the Go to Parts girl. Hello, Kaylee. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you. So you reached out and you, paraphrasing here, basically said, hey, would it be cool if I came on and we had a Mental Health Monday around a specific topic? So why don't you share with us what that topic is, a little bit of background, and let's see where we go.
Yeah, I've watched your show and I really think that you're doing great things by, bringing mental health to the forefront. And I reached out because I went through, my dad was addicted to a few things. And so I wanted to bring that up because I think a part of what he went through was because of mental health. And, essentially, I think even eventually kind of losing his mind. So that's what I wanted to talk about today was addiction, really.
It's an important topic. We've had people on this show before that have lost loved ones to addiction. Jeffrey Johnston comes to mind, a couple other people. And so when you have these discussions, right, about addiction, how it affects people, I think we always focus on, and I do, especially as an addict myself, I focus on the story of the addict, right, or the individual. We rarely focus, and I don't know why, on the people involved, right? The families, that part of it. We tend to talk about the addicted, not the affected of the addiction. So, Kaylee, context me here. Do you have a fairly good relationship with your dad growing up? Like, how does that look on the surface? Before we dive into that part of it, the context helps to understand, what does that relationship just on the surface look like?
No, I'm really glad you asked that because I feel like what happened with my experience with this is I got to see the version of the sober version of my dad, and then I got to see him get addicted. So it wasn't like he was always addicted to drugs. It was like I had a normal dad growing up. I think, in his younger days, he, dabbled in, drugs or whatnot. And then my parents started a family and they had a normal life and I had a normal upbringing. Like, I would say compared to other stories I've heard,
Sure.
I was pretty fortunate. So yeah, that was just, something that I experienced was seeing him as a normal person, not normal. I don't want to say addicts are not normal, but
yeah, but I understand what you mean. Without addiction present or without addiction being obvious, you went through having the dad everyone has, right? Is involved in your life, does what he can to be around, whatever, right? It wasn't like you said. I think that it's important to understand that you didn't grow up with an addicted father, as far as you know, right? I hate to say that you don't know, but as far as you know, as far as life was, that wasn't a forefront of yours because you saw what the real addiction looked like. Was there a moment, Kaylee, did something happen in one's life that led someone down a path? Again, tell me if we're getting too personal. I'm happy to stop asking questions. But
I actually like sharing this because it helps me process it more and just, all of it. But yeah, so he was in construction and he hurt his back. So I think that's what led to his addiction to Vicodin. And so I think at first it was just like, a very functioning style of addiction, where he was still working, he was able, but then I think it just overcame him where it was like all he cared about was getting more and having more and wasn't focused on us as a family or anything like that. So I think that's where it started, was hurting his back.
And that's not, it's like one of the most common stories around, right? Is that someone gets injured, someone decides to go down the world, because as a society, what we will do, right, is we will go to big pharma and we will get answers, and the answers we get are typically in pill form. They just are. I just recently, unfortunately, broke a toe. And you go there and they're like, yeah, well, did you need any of this or that? Otherwise, just go home and take 16 Advil over a day's time and don't worry about it. It's like, hold on a second. It was hardcore drugs or liver damage. Like, is this what we're saying to everyone? And it just sort of, it just streams right for them. No one really thinks through that. So Kaylee, when you see your dad, were you seeing, well, first of all, did this happen while you lived at home? You're an adult now, you have a family. Were you present to see this sort of deterioration, or is this something you got to see from a distance or via your mother, or how did that part happen?
No, I was, I'm trying to think what year, when you heard us back. I was probably around like 12-ish.
Okay, so you were a kid when this happened.
I was a kid, yeah.
So you had a normal upbringing until about 12-ish, and then things might tend to be a little different.
So about 15-ish is when it got really like, okay, there's a problem.
3 years.
Like, good 3 years. Oh, probably even longer. If I'm looking at the time frame. Yeah.
Wow. And that's because addiction can be hidden easily. That's how addiction works, because right?
Yeah, it can be hidden, and I think people on the outside but inside are in denial. Like, I think my mom was in denial. Obviously, we're kids, so we don't really know what's going on. But you're in. Or
they're defendants, right? Mom's like, hey, he hurt his back. Give the guy a break. He's dealing with what he's got to deal with. He takes care of his family, whatever, right? And especially if the medication. Now, did your dad return back to construction work?
Yeah.
After he was hurt? So the fact is that if it got him there, right? If the drug propelled him to get back to work, the driving force for the drug is the work, is the availability to do so. And even the addict in the moment, I don't believe realize how fast the addiction like a wave, it just comes over you. Because then now you got to remember how to swim, right? But that's that moment where it happens, you don't really know it's happening. And it can be quite scary. So as a kid dealing with that, Kaylee, what things did you notice? What sort of stood out to you, if you can remember anything now, especially retrospectively? Anything stand out to you where like, man, I should have seen that?
The constant, like, just putting pills in his mouth. He always had pills in his pocket. Wow. Just like, probably 30 a day, just popping pills. So it's not very normal. No. But like, as far as his behavior went, it wasn't like that noticeable, because he was still working. He was still my dad. So it wasn't till I was older and he transitioned to a different drug that I really started like, okay, this is, you're really losing it.
It's how it works, right? Gateway drugs are not a joke. The fact that people deem marijuana as one is probably in today's world a little bit more laughable, considering how we handle big pharma and at what age we start doling that out and at what level. That's an easy gateway because it was acquired legally. It was given to you on prescription. Your name is printed on a bottle. It tells you to take these things. So it's easy to do that. Do you want to delve into what that next jump was, or do you want to just call it a different one?
No, it was meth. He went to meth. And I think, based on conversations, because we talked about these things like later on in life, he couldn't get the pills as easily anymore. So, and I think when he went into this different role that wasn't construction, and it was more of a management and a lot more responsibilities, led to a lot of stress. And it was in a bad neighborhood. I'm making excuses, but ultimately he made that decision. But I think I'm trying to okay, this might be why.
Yeah, and you're trying to rationalize someone's behavior because they're close to you. You love them. Think about what your mom had been doing for multiple years, right? Trying to rationalize and support all in one mix. It can't be easy. Like, my wife has been with me now 20 years. We've been hanging out together. 19 years ago and 6 months ago, it almost all came crashing down because I was a lay down drunk who came home way too drunk, something she had never experienced in her life, ever. And I woke up to her not being in my house, and she came back and she said, look, if we're going to do this, which we both left other people to try this can never, ever happen again, ever. And it was just like, okay, all right. And so I I just quit drinking. Okay, if that's what you need, then we'll just stop and we'll do it. Because earlier in my life, I had struggles with drugs. Again, I wish I had just, been hooked on one little thing. But as a young kid, I got into a bunch of different things. And so when you do that, right, you find out how life goes. But I knew I could stop. If I could stop things like cocaine, right, I can stop things like alcohol. That seemed easier to me. So we did it. I stopped cold turkey, did it, no problem. And in talking to my dad, who is I'm 40. My dad's gotta be like 35 years sober, somewhere in that neighborhood. Alcoholic, never touched drugs in his life, but an alcoholic to the end. Yeah. When I talk about being sober, I'd say, Dad, sobriety's fine. I can do it. It's no issue. But the problem is I like a casual drink. I like to be able to hang out with my buddies, have a beer, whatever. And he looked me, Kaylee, dead in the eyes, and he goes, if you can do that, you should do that, because I don't know what the point of having one drink is. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, you buy beer, you drink beer, you get drunk, you go to bed. And I'm like, no wonder you're sober, right? And he's like, yes, that's exactly why, because I don't have a middle ground. Was your dad trying to rationalize a middle ground, Kaylee? Was there anything where he was trying to come back? Like, were you witness to anything like that, where he was trying to say, look, I'm doing this because I have to, before he'd step to the meth? Was there a point where it was like, look, just leave me alone. This is what I need to do to manage where my life's at?
Yeah, before the meth, I think that was kind of like at his point of like, this is what I need to do to function. But there was a point where my mom was, sick of it, because he was putting that in front of all of his priorities. So he did go to rehab. But that's the thing, is I don't think he ever went to rehab for himself. He went to rehab for my mom or us. And
yeah, he went for someone else. And that was before he went to rehab, before the meth addiction began.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So then he was doing really good, got a new job that wasn't as labor intensive. And then that's when the whole meth thing happened. And I honestly don't know what triggered it, or I really don't know. Because I think what he did was he went back to the pills. The pills were hard to get. And then for some reason tried meth, because I think that's what he used to do before he had a family.
Because I think that pain can do that. There's no joke, right? And I don't know if you've ever lived with I've had severe back pain. I fractured a vertebrae. That shit can be insurmountable, or it can feel as such. And when something works, something numbs it, something gets rid of it. Yeah. That's one thing. But that, again, Kaylee, it's a excuse. It's a cope. It's a reason to not go see a chiropractor. You know what I mean? Like all these other things we could go do to address what's wrong with our back. Instead, we're like, what's easier is just getting pills and going to work. Mm-hmm. In the sounds of it, you have not had individual experience with drugs. Is that fair to say, Kaylee? Like, your experience with drugs is probably Advil.
Yeah, correct.
Right?
I've not done hard drugs.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So to you, this must, as you've gotten older, was it like a point of conversation? Was it resentment? Is it a mix of both? Like, how do you have your discussions with your dad as an adult about this?
Well, my dad, he passed away.
Okay.
He didn't get sober.
Okay. So after meth, that was the beginning of the end, basically.
That's probably what killed him, really.
Okay.
I think.
How old were you when that happened?
I was, it was in 2018.
28.
How many years ago it was?
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, it's 5 years ago, good enough. We're not here to get into a lady's age. That's not what I meant.
But I was an adult.
Yeah, you were an adult. So were you having discussions previous to him passing away? Like what did it look like in the last year of you trying to discuss or have communication, or did you not have communication with him and he ended up dying without you really even being a part of his life, which can happen to addicts as well?
A little bit of both. So the last couple of years of his life, we, gosh, it's all like kind of, I'm looking back, I'm like the timeline, I'm trying to make the timeline make sense. But basically, we did have conversations. I tried. There was lots of times where we all tried at different times. Like my mom tried at her time because, she's like, I can't do this anymore. We need to get a divorce.
Yeah. Did she end up doing that?
Yes, she did.
She did.
She did. because she had tried with, he'd gone to rehab before. She kept trying and trying, and she's just like, I can't do this anymore. You have to figure this out. And then at that point, I think my brother and him were like living together because they were like separated. So my brother got to try, my older brother. He's only a couple of years older. So he got to try with him for a little bit. Then I got to try when I moved up to my grandparents' house after my grandma passed away, where he was now living with them. So I got to be there and see how far and bad it's gotten or it had gotten. And I removed him from the house because he wasn't contributing. He wasn't taking it seriously. Like all of these steps, I'm like, how are you not? What? I don't understand why you're not, trying to fix this. My mom loves you. They're high school sweethearts. They love you. Like she loves him. And if you could just get his stuff together, but
kids
so
love
yeah.
you. They're all putting the effort in. Everyone around you is putting the effort in. So you remove your dad from where you're living.
Yeah. I took all of his stuff and put it on the front yard because he wasn't going to do it. I tried to tell him to leave.
What is this? Does this go any further? Does he just pick up his shit and leave? I mean, what happens next?
Yeah. So yeah, he was pretty angry at me, but also it was like an angry, but also this, because I remember when he came, he didn't speak to me. I didn't want to speak to him. The look in his face was not my dad. It was almost like evil. But it was also kind of like he knew, like he's like, I've failed and I know, and like, with his head kind of down, like.
Yeah, no one likes that to be the case, right? No one likes to see that in their face. No one likes to be told about failure, but this wasn't the first time. It wasn't the first time it had been brought to his attention. It wasn't the first time people had been there. When you look at that part of your life and you think about what addiction has done to you, how do you as a parent speak to will you speak to your daughter about your father, about his life, and about that part of your life? Because it is a large part, right? So you're 12.
Yeah.
You probably dealt with this more than half your life or thereabouts. And so that's a big chunk. What's the plan? Because I know you're an unbelievable mom who just loves the kids. What's the plan?
I haven't really thought about the plan because he's passed away now. I talked to her like all the great things about him, and though the unfortunate thing is like when someone passes, you're like, not that it's like it's the way I guess it was supposed to be, right? Like you were so lost and so far down that evil, like I'm gonna call it demonic because it really is, path that you couldn't come back from it. And the best thing that could have happened is, of course I wanted him to get sober, but so yeah, I talk about him in a good spirit because I have really good memories. But I also have a little brother who is 14 who got to really only experience that part of my dad. He didn't get to see both sides. So that's actually kind of the conversation that I've had to deal with and be really real with him. And me and my mom obviously have discussed like she's okay with,
Sure, yeah, but I mean it's still part of a legacy, right? So it's about how do we keep it intact? How do we do more about it, right? So like I've learned things recently about like my grandparents, just in different things about their lives and lifestyles. And it's crazy to think about because I'm like, man, now this makes sense and that makes sense. And this makes sense. And you're just like, that's really super interesting. You know what I mean? Like, it's my grandfather, as my dad came to tell me after all these years that my grandfather was like a homosexual, like, in World War II, like going through life and trying to live this way. And I'm just, my dad was like, does it change your perspective? I'm like, Dad, actually, it's frustrating. Now I have a million questions I'll never get answered. Like that's it. And I want to know about how it was, what the life was. But now all the outfits, just everything just so makes sense to me, Dad. Like, I appreciate you telling me. And he was like, I'm sorry it took so long. It's one of those things that as a kid, he wasn't prepared to talk about because he grew up in a military household. So there was no way he had ever thought that was a part of his actual life. Right. So
yeah.
But the legacy is what my dad was worried about. He was worried about what I would think of the legacy of my grandfather. And in no way does it tarnish it. Now, the two are not synonymous, but the history and how you talk about it, when you talk to your younger brother, and do you continue to try and bring that positive aspect because he's seen so much of the negative? Do you try and help walk him through that this wasn't about him and that this is just how what is that like, especially being that young and you being, you having lived at a different half? What's that conversation been like?
It was really hard in the beginning because at first I didn't really want to tell him, or we didn't want to tell him how he died or what, the addiction. But then once he got a little older and could understand, we openly wanted him to understand that he was addicted, but that it wasn't anyone's fault. It was just, it was just one of those things that happens, and it's unfortunate. But my dad was such a hardworking person and provided for his family and always worked really hard. And so that's what we always, bring up to him. But it's still a work in progress. I think there's a lot of things coming up now that he's 15 that, that we're going to
Is there an opposite side to that with your older brother, albeit just a few years older than you? Is there an opposite side where him, and being a guy, right? Sometimes I think there can be more resentment from amongst the men than potentially women in some areas, and then less in other areas. What's that been like for you to see your older brother go through?
I think he was pretty resentful towards my dad. It's been a lot of resentment, like anger, because we were angry with my mom too, because we felt like she gave up. But we also understood,
Yeah, it's tough to not be, right? You see someone in front of you, you're like, why couldn't you do more, right? But behind the scenes, she's like, guys, what more is there? Like we've gone down these rabbit holes. We've put people in rehab. We've come back out again, and I said a little bit to you, in the pre-show that the rehab cycle in our country is broken. We have to figure out a better way to take care of people in this country with mental illness, with drug addiction. Putting these people in prisons and this is not helpful. None of this is helpful. So you need to be dealing with the addiction, and it starts with understanding it at the very basic level, which we take this story with your father full circle and we come back to how it began, which is with something that he was prescribed by a doctor at a level at which I'm not saying they shouldn't, but we must do a better job of education and monitoring and understanding that there has to be other things people do. Kaylee, as you've gotten older, have you gotten anything come to you about being more involved in the space, less involved in the space, making sure that your kid knows to stay away from every drug, everything in the world? Like because I think you indulge in the additional, the adult beverage, right? Once in a while. I don't know that you live a sober life. Potentially you do. But how do you kind of balance all of this in having discussions with your daughter, not so much about your father, but because of now how you have the history of drug addiction within the bones? How does it happen for you moving forward?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question, because well, she's 3, so I don't know if
I get it, right? I understand. 3.
Yeah. I think it's something that I'm definitely going to be like more involved with talking to her about later on. It's just like a hard thing to really think about. Because I do partake in alcohol. Like I do have a couple beers every now and then. And Carson, my little brother, he's seen that. And so that's kind of the hard conversation too, of like,
I guess that's really what it's about, right? Is how are you educating your brother? I guess, what are those discussions about him? And I asked because I had a friend of mine who was unfortunately just got caught in the wrong bar fight and ended up being killed in this bar fight. And from it, at his funeral, I saw his little brother, and his little brother was in a car using methamphetamines. And within months, his little brother had OD'd. And so my friend's parents had been through, and my buddy had lost his older brother, his younger brother, and it was just him left, and then his parents, and then his mom committed suicide. I mean, it's crazy, right? But that's the domino effect. So what are the conversations look like to the youngest version to say, hey, dude, drugs are bad, whatever. How do we go through this discussion with him at 13?
Yeah. I think that we've had those discussions, and I think that my mom went through some, her own issues that she had to go through too, like after losing my dad, or divorcing my dad and then losing my dad and all of that. And then so I don't think that, I think counseling is probably the next step, because Carson has done really well with staying pretty positive, but I think he's made some mistakes too that he's going to be learning from. And I don't think that I'm basically saying I feel like I've failed to really support him and make him and it's not even really the decisions he's made about, it hasn't been about drugs. It's just, I feel like I've failed to really support him and make him, but it's almost like one of those things. It's like, you can't force someone to see or understand. Like, they have to make mistakes.
My whole family told me I was a drunk. Okay. For months on end, my whole family was like, Sean, I bought my first house when I was 19. It was immediately a frat house. That's immediately how I lived my life. We'd already been partying before that. So I knew it. But everyone was like, you're a drunk. I'm like, mind your own business. And like my dad, before me, hey, I go to work. I don't get in trouble. I show up to the job. Leave me alone. Right? How I spend my out of work time is none of your business.
Yeah.
Then my now wife comes along, and within one conversation, I'm like, yes, you're absolutely right. I have a problem. I will stop doing that. Right. And my whole family's like, well, what the hell? Well, sometimes it's how and who delivers the message. But Kaylee, it's not like, again, it's difficult for you to speak on something, right? Like, I couldn't go do your job right now. I don't know shit about parts. So how could I expect you to be able to walk into a conversation with your little brother and talk about drugs when it has not been a part of your history nor DNA? Like, yes, dealing with your dad, but dealing with addiction and using drugs and being addicted are not the same thing. And so that's an interesting part, because I wonder how someone his age hears, knows, educates, because today's younger generation, right, Kaylee? I'm old, I guess, at 40, but the younger generation, the way they talk about sex and drugs is just like the craziest, most uncomfortable thing I've ever seen in my life, because it's just so rapid. You know, my nephew was like, oh, Uncle Sean, I could, if you need a joint, I could score a joint on TikTok. And I'm just like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, you just got to TikTok this message. And I'm like,
oh my gosh,
I can't believe this is happening. Right. Yeah. So that speed of it with it, your little brother, Kaylee, please don't feel like you failed anyone. I think that you're trying to talk to him is a lot. I just don't know where else you go to get that resource. And see, that's part of my problem with this whole culture. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no resources available to really, absolutely.
To help you educate him so that he knows that, hey, this is what happened. This is how we got here. When you look back at your dad and your life, you've talked a lot about the positive, a lot about that. And I commend the hell out of you for that. Where do you contemplate and deal with the not positive? How do you outlet the nastiness of that part of your life?
Well, I would say when he was alive, there was a lot more negative and a lot more anger. Okay. But there are
was that at him? Was it at your mother? Was it angry at the world? How did Kaylee put that everything?
Just angry, mostly at him. Okay. Because I mean, I was an adult, so I could understand, like, he's making these decisions, but I'm also angry at like the drug and the way everything works, because I could see that it literally was killing his mind. Like, it was almost like when he was on the drug, he was normal, and when he wasn't normal. Does that make sense? Like,
that's it because. So yes, it makes sense. That particular drug, which is unfortunately and fortunately one that I have never delved into. There are not many, unfortunately. That is one of them, because all that I was ever told was it was 30 seconds. You go chasing for the next 30 years. And I had no interest in doing that, because I knew that the drugs I used, how I used them, what I got from them is how I used them and what I got from them. But if something made me euphoric for 30 seconds and my body knew I needed to go have that every 30 seconds, that don't work for me. I know myself well enough to know that doesn't work. So the drug is designed, that particular drug is designed to hook you in. And there aren't many other outcomes than
No.
the one that you've experienced, and it's
Yeah.
it's the worst. Was it an overdose, Kaylee? Was it to something else? I mean, I hate to get to the final detail of that, but sometimes it's even worse where someone's like, yeah, they were driving a car and, you know, all these other things. So what was that the case? Is that how it ended?
Yeah, I think it was an overdose, because like I think with meth it's a little bit different to detect. Like heroin, right? Like it's that's a little bit more easier to overdose on, I think, based on what I understand. He had an aneurysm, so I think that's
Okay,
the drug enhanced and made that happen. So
Yes.
he was on life support when we did get to see him, and like once they figured out who he was and then we got to say goodbye in that way, but he wasn't there, you know.
Was he not living it? Was he living on the streets, Kaylee? I mean, the way that you say that, when they knew who he was and how he was found, were you estranged at that point, where he obviously didn't have a phone contact? I mean, probably walked around with very little then in that regard.
Yeah, no, he lived in his truck. So after I tried to first of all, when I took him out of my grandparents' house, I felt it was kind of harsh too, because his mom had just passed away a few months prior, but it was like, we need to get you out because we have to sell the house, blah blah blah. And I presented like, okay, there's places I know people that you could go get help. Like I'm trying to give you options, but he didn't want to take those. So then he lived in his truck. So fortunately he had a truck, and he would just or he bounced around with whoever in the area. I don't know. We weren't really estranged though. That's the thing is, after that happened, he was mad at me. But then he would come around because, you know, he would hang out in that town, and I was living at my grandparents, helping my grandpa. Not that our relationship got better, but we just talked more because he was around, and he was just like, you know, he was just living his life, and he was going to do what he was going to do. And I was like, at this point where I'm like, I feel like you're going to die soon. So I'm just going to take advantage of this time and be with you as much as I can without you taking advantage of me. Because that was the other part of it, of like, hey, can I borrow $20? Or, you know, hey, can you drive me over here? And it was like, I made sure to kind of draw that boundary. I mean, there was a couple times where I did give him $20, but
yeah, no, you can't. I have a good buddy of mine selling cars back in Colorado. He always got me. And he used his daughters because he knew that was a soft spot for me. He'd be like, dude, daughters need to eat. And I'm just like, fuck, I know they're not going to eat. I know that's not what this is for. I know it. Here's $50. You know what I mean? Like, you can't stop yourself because you're as cold as you may feel for throwing somebody out.
Yeah.
That was like the last resort that you had taken in your life. It wasn't like you woke up, you're like, cool, we've been totally reasonable, but today I'm throwing you out. That's not what happened.
No.
So how do you come to terms with the end of this relationship, Kaylee? How does Kaylee process the end?
How do I process the end? Well, fortunately, I think before he passed away, because I had lost my grandma, I think I got down more of a spiritual path. I don't want to say it's religion, more spiritual, and really just you know, how do I say it? I don't want to sound crazy, but like when someone passes, you can get messages from them and you can hear them, and that's kind of where I found my peace, was being open to receiving that. And you know, my dad doesn't come around as much now. I think he's always around, but like I think after someone just passes, you have more experience with them a little bit more. So he would always come to in my dreams, and it was always very like peaceful, and it was never anger. I think even one dream, which I remember, he told me about everything, how it all happens, like when you die, like all of it, but I don't remember it.
Yeah, right. Of course, it's like the falling dream. Damn it!
Yes.
Right? I mean, it's the same thing. Damn it! That is so cool. No, look, Kaylee, we got an animal communicator we have on speed dial in this house. Okay, so like, I'm with you. If I believe I can talk to my dog that died of cancer, I'm on board with everything you're talking about. So absolutely, absolutely, I get it. So the dream happens. You, if the whole world is unfolding in front of you, all the answers, you wake up, you got nothing.
I got nothing, but I remember how I felt in the dream.
Yeah.
I felt like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But I also felt like, he was telling me like, it's okay. And then you get messages through like music. So the biggest song is the Eagles, and it's Peaceful Easy Feeling, I think is the name of the song.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for me, when I listen to those words, it's my dad telling me like he tried and tried, but like he knew he wasn't going to see us again, and like, he's in this better place. So that's how I found peace with it, because of course I didn't want him to die, but it's kind of like I already knew it was going to happen before it happened, because I had a dream about it.
Ooh, wow, Miss Kaylee, you got some tapping into the universe stuff going on there. That's pretty cool. My wife has a lot of that as well, and it's something that you use the phrase "open and allowed," right? And really, and saying to yourself that I'm ready for this.
Yes.
And that part of the spirituality is something that, part of spirituality is what's led me to trying certain drugs. I won't lie to you, that trying the things that are based in historical culture, that's more what I'm referring to, not necessarily, yes, they are recreational, but they're based in history, and they're meant for that opening, that awakening. So yes, I mean, the ayahuascas of the world, these sorts of things that exist, yes, they're there for it. And I plant-based medicine, I cannot tell you enough about it. And if you ever get time to research it, please go do it. Please, anyone watching this, go look up plant-based medicines and look at what the differences are and what they can do to help. It's not yes, drugs, because we use the connotation very simply here. So everything that is not alcohol is drugs. Fine, some are better than others. That's what I'll tell you. And it's not about an addiction as it is about an awakening. Anyways, you are here, you are open to this, you've dealt with this.
Yeah.
Is that how you leave it? Like, I guess you're just like, hey, I get it. My dad, he's in a better place. Did your life and your family take on a sense of calm after there's obviously a grieving period, but is there a sense of calm where things don't feel like we're all on edge and having to look and worry about every step because this particular thing is no longer a part of the day-to-day? Yeah,
that's exactly what happened. Just that piece of like, once you come to terms of like, this really did happen. And because when they're alive, you have this hope. You always have this hope, and you're always worried, and you're always thinking about them. Like, I remember I would never put my phone on silent to go to bed, because I just didn't want to miss a call from him. And I'm the positive part is like, he still communicated with me, he still reached out to me. Because I think I was like his in between, because obviously my mom didn't talk to him. And then when my little brother because I moved away, I moved to Arizona before he passed away. He passed away in the summer. So I moved in May, and then he passed away in August. So it was a few months about a year of being on the streets, I guess.
Wow. Yeah. Kaylee, I got to tell you, you have been so open and honest with us. And I hope that anyone watching realizes that there are people going through what you're going through. There are people who, even if they themselves haven't had firsthand experience with something, have probably had secondhand experience with it. And the value of that perspective is incredible. Kaylee, thank you so much. I cannot thank you enough for bringing this topic up, for reaching out in the first place. And again, just sort of bearing the soul and being honest about what that's done for you. Is there anything you'd like to leave the audience with as it relates to this topic as we let you go?
I would say to talk about it more, because at first I was very like kind of ashamed to bring it up. But it's a part of what has driven me too, and a part of what's helped me. And I really think that if we talk about it more, then we'll all be kind of better, and not internalizing all this anger, and really just be, I think what honestly, if you go back to like what really helped me is the spiritual aspect of really being open to that communication. Because people pass away and then you're like angry, they never got better, and I can't be angry. So
wow, cannot be angry. You hear this, folks? Listen to this whole episode, come to the last second, and listen to this young woman tell you that she can't be angry after the card she has been dealt. Kaylee, thank you so much. You are a tremendous human. Please keep it up.
thank you.
Everybody, that's the show for this week. I hope you tune in next week and enjoy the start to your April.